And Norman and I will do the call, and then you'll respond with Larry and Louie.
And we always have seats on, we can actually sit on pillows in the front area if you like to sit in lotus position.
Holy, 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 source of all life,
Source of all life,
source of all life,
source of all life,
light of my soul,
light of my soul,
light of my soul,
light of my soul.
holy, living in the ecstasy of love, of love.
Living in the ecstasy of love,
Living in the ecstasy of love, of love.
living in the ecstasy of love,
Divine love, oh, divine love, oh, divine love, oh. hands. Living in the ecstasy of love, of love.
Living in the ecstasy of love.
Living in the ecstasy of love, of love.
Living in the ecstasy of love.
Divine love, oh, divine love, oh, divine love, holy, holy. Source of all life,
Source of
light of my soul.
light of my soul.
Living in the ecstasy of love, of love.
Living in the ecstasy of love.
Divine love, oh, 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 divine love. 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 Oh, divine love.
Good morning, everyone. Once again, I request that a couple of volunteers help to clear the area here, clear the altar after the service in preparation for the next service. In the first book of Genesis, we have possibly the most profound metaphysical story in the entire Bible. And it is so flowing with metaphysical subtle truths that it really would require more time than one has at a single Sunday session. So I'm simply going to, I'm going to take it down a little bit to get to the essential truth, the most essential truth of it. Most of you are aware of the story. God creates mankind in his image and likeness, creates him in the Garden of Eden. The translation from the actual Hebrew means garden of delight, garden of true happiness and light. Male and female, he creates mankind, and God states, it is good. Then God says to mankind, you may freely eat of any tree in the garden, but of the tree in the midst of the garden, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you shall not eat. For if you were to eat of that tree in that day, you will surely die. Most of you know what happens. It goes something like this. The serpent, which is defined as the most cunning creature in all creation, says to the man and woman, did God say you may not eat of the trees of the garden? And the woman answers, no, we can eat of any of the trees in the garden, but we were warned to never eat of the tree in the midst of the garden, tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And the serpent said, you will not die if you eat of that tree. In fact, if you eat of that tree, you'll become like God, knowing good and evil. Actually, this story is better understood. You'll be like God, knowing right and wrong. And it means the absolute right and wrong of things, you will know that, just as God knows that. And so they partake of that tree. Again, at least with this particular story, most people are no longer, there used to be still some people hanging out with the whole idea that the Garden of Eden was an actual place and they're trying to locate it somewhere in the world. So you know it's a symbolic story throughout. If you just allow yourself to be aware of man's situation, mankind's situation, you'll come to understand what the story is relating. It is this: mankind is brought into existence, and the objective of that was of happiness. Mankind was born to be happy. However, mankind is told he can eat of any experience in life. Mankind can have any experience he or she wants in life. But don't ever come to the place where you suppose you know the actual right and wrong of things. Because in the time you do that, you will be separated from the joy of creation itself. And so what happens is, where the voice for God was very clear to mankind in the garden, in the creation, it was the voice of the serpent, which everyone can easily identify as, in these modern times, as the ego-centered idea of self, which speaks to us almost incessantly, and we rely upon it. We suppose that we can actually observe and gain enough understanding to make the decisions that will be right and absolutely true and necessary to bring about harmony, healing, and peace. But you see, the masters of these metaphysical truths are letting us know that that voice that we have come to live in and from is cunning, and it will remove us from happiness and delight. It'll remove us from enlightened awareness as well, because it removes us from the subtle guiding voice of life itself, life that gave us life. So you see, the spiritual journey with all the surface New Age stuff that goes on, what is really going to be helpful is if we can get to this place and understand that we can actually discern when the voice that has replaced the guiding awareness of the presence of God, when that voice is operating, it is operating in illusion. Mankind, no single one ever has, no man, no woman, ever has or ever will, not with all the technology and the computers, ever will be able to know what is ultimately right and what is ultimately going to prevail and be good and bring harmony. It cannot happen. Mankind has not the ability to judge on that level. Mankind is discerning. He can decide these little rights and wrongs for himself in his life. He can learn to avoid being hit by an automobile in traffic and things like that. But when it comes down to understanding what life is and its purpose, mankind is not capable of discerning that. Mankind has so many other purposes that go counter to the purpose of the divine. And so it then becomes incumbent upon anyone who would come to happiness again to be able to release the voice of illusion and be open to that presence that is there to reveal what is actually true, that brings harmony and peace. Whether you know it or not, that happens to be the journey of every human being. If you are interested in finding life and finding it abundantly as was promised, then you will come to this place, this juncture, where you will know that the ultimate necessity involving spiritual practice is being able to realize when this limited thinking voice of the world is making judgments. It actually is making judgments that will bring about inharmony, frustration, fear, and concern. You look out at the world is living. That is the one God that Jesus said, called the ruler of this world. He said, this ruler of this world is coming, but it has no hold on me. The ruler of the world is the illusionary consciousness that defines us as separate body minds in a world of separate other experience. And it comes with the idea that we should be smart enough to be able to observe enough and make the decisions that will bring healing, harmony, and peace to the world. As it has never happened, I don't suppose it ever will happen unless there is a complete transformation in consciousness. And this truth, the dilemma that man suffers from, that he thinks the voice that's in his head that never stops speaking is the voice that will finally guide him to the garden of delight again. The master of life said, listen to these amazing things. Because this master also said, my words are never going to go away. They can't, because they're the truth of life. Judge not, that you be not judged. For with the measure you judge, you are judged. Judge not. What does that mean? It means to learn to become neutral in awareness. What would happen if your thinking process began to relax and you opened up to just becoming, listen to it, what he said, a servant of all creation? What would happen if you just opened up to that? What would happen is you'd be in the presence of the teachings of the power of now. If you were to open up and become neutral without this really strong self-centered idea of your own thinking prowess, you would let that go, and you would more or less watch or observe life. And you would observe it without those strong, definitive judgments that we always wind up holding against ourselves. Look what happened to the mankind in the Garden of Delight. Once he partook of that tree, once he supposed that he really could be like God, deciding what was necessary and needed and what was truly right and wrong, he hid himself from God. And he said, God said, where are you? Why are you hiding? He said, well, because I was naked. I covered myself. Here's the most telling question in all of the Bible. Who told you you were naked? We create our own guilt because we live in self-betrayal. The self of life is ourself. And by turning away from it, by not allowing ourselves to tune into each day and know the absolute miracle of being alive and look upon the creation and the majesty of creation, this garden of delight, this majesty of delight, to hold these limited ideas about things, experiences, others, yourself, the past, the possible future, is what is taking you away from the insight and the spontaneity of living in the present moment, fearlessly, beautifully, moving with the thinking mind of God. So Eckhart Tolle will say this. Can we have this on the PowerPoint, please? From his book, Stillness Speaks, much suffering, much unhappiness arises when you take each thought that comes into your head for the truth. Situations don't make you unhappy. They may cause you physical pain, but they don't make you unhappy. Your interpretations, the stories you tell yourself, make you unhappy. Suffering begins when you mentally name or label a situation in some way as undesirable or bad. You resent a situation, and that resentment personalizes it and brings in a reactive me. If you're new here, I'll read this again. Because if you were left on a deserted island and never had any opportunity to know what it means to be alive, this passage right here would be enough to know the truth that will make you free. Much suffering, much unhappiness arises when you take each thought that comes into your head for the truth. Situations don't make you unhappy. They may cause you physical pain, but they don't make you unhappy. Your interpretations, the stories you tell yourself, make you unhappy. Suffering begins when you mentally name or label a situation in some way as undesirable or bad. You resent the situation, and that resentment personalizes it and brings in a reactive me. So you see the high hurdle on the journey to enlightenment. You see why the master of life did not call his disciples out of the world. He wanted his disciples to remain in the world, but to be kept from the evil one. That's the way it's written. It's written by someone whose words will never go away. Who is the evil one? What is the evil one? We are born with it. It's referred to sometimes as the original sin, the original error. We're born in it, raised in it, educated in it, and supposedly driven in the idea that if you become smart enough, you'll be able to figure out how to make everything work in your life. But it should ultimately be revealed to us that we cannot do that. There's an interesting story, very interesting story, you may have heard it already, about this peasant farmer who he's living with his wife and his teenage son. And they have a small farm in Russia. And one day he buys a mare, this horse. And the people in the village said, "Oh, how fortunate it is that your land, over all these years you've worked so hard, now you have purchased a horse that's going to help you plow your land, and you'll be able to produce even more good crops." And so the farmer says, "Who's to say what is good and bad?" A few weeks later, the horse runs away, the mare runs away. And the villagers say, "Oh my goodness, how bad, how terrible, how unfortunate. You no longer have that mare to help you plow the field." And the farmer says, "Who's to say what is good and what is bad?" And then a few days later, the mare comes back with a stallion behind her. And the people in the village say, "Oh, how fortunate, now you have two horses. The mare has come back and has a stallion. That's good." And the farmer says, "Who's to say what is good and what is bad?" And then the son decides he's going to try to break the horse, the stallion, so that he can be used to work the farm. But in the process of trying to break the horse, he's thrown off and he breaks his leg. And so everybody in the village says, "Oh, how terrible, your son has broken his leg. He's no longer able to help you with the farm. It'll be a while before he even heals. And so it's bad." And the farmer says, "Who's to say what is good and what is bad?" Then, a week later, the army comes by and they're conscripting all the young men to go to war. But they don't take the young man with the broken leg because he's still mending and he's not fit for battle. And so the villagers say, "How fortunate it is that your son has broken his leg, because now he doesn't have to go and fight in this terrible war." And the farmer says, "Who's to say what is good and what is bad?" It's kind of a silly story, but it's a very accurate one in relating the inability of knowing the ultimate outcome of almost anything. The inability of, and I'll give you a modern day example of this. I should be doing more overheads. I think they'd be more helpful. I need to turn to Tolle. Let me give you another Eckhart Tolle quote. Can we have this? This is on page 123 of Stillness Speaks. "Go beyond good and bad by refraining from mentally labeling anything as good or bad. When you go beyond the habitual naming, the power of the universe moves through you. When you are in a non-reactive relationship to experiences, what you would have called bad before often turns around quickly, if not immediately. Through the power of life itself, watch what happens when you don't name an experience as bad and instead bring an inner acceptance, an inner yes to it, and so let it be as it is." This is true yoga. all the games that are played on the surface limited New Age idea, attempting to bring people to the consciousness that you can have mind over matter. You'll ultimately be able to tell this universe how to bring about every experience that you desire, and you will avoid all the limited experiences, is, in capital letters, BS. This is yoga. This is the path to mastery right here. So let's take this back again. I'll read it again. Go beyond good and bad by refraining from mentally labeling anything as good or bad. When you go beyond the habitual naming, the power of the universe moves through you. When you are in a non-reactive relationship to experiences, what you would have called bad before often turns around quickly, if not immediately, through the power of life itself. Watch what happens when you don't name an experience as bad and instead bring an inner acceptance and inner yes to it, and so let it be as it is. I want to give you an up-to-date example. A marvelous actress named Renee Zellweger, some years ago, decided to get cosmetic surgery on her face. And it was such a terrible job that they did that the media never stopped harping on it. It so affected her career that she could not even get a film for a long time. Then she did a couple of really second banana stuff. She was a movie star. And this particular plastic surgery just didn't work for her. And boy, oh boy, did she suffer that, and the ridicule that came out of, the world, the villagers. How could you have done that? It's bad, it's bad, it's bad. But you'll notice that what Tolle is saying, when you let it go, there's a power, a movement from life itself, life, the wisdom of life itself, that brings a balance. Renee Zellweger just won the Golden Globe for her betrayal of Judy Garland in the movie Judy. She even did her own singing. She's back on top. Who would ever thought it would come about in that way? Because we don't know. And when we get to that place where we don't need to pretend to know, you will see how much peace you actually have. You'll see how life really works in concert to bless you over and over again. Let me conclude this with one more quote from Eckhart Tolle's book. Is suffering really necessary? Yes and no. If you had not suffered as you have, there would be no depth to you as a human being, no humility, no compassion. You would not be reading this now. Suffering cracks open the shell of ego, and then comes a point when it has served its purpose. Suffering is necessary until you realize it is unnecessary. True freedom and the end of suffering is a thing in such a way as if you had, let me read this right. True freedom and the end of suffering is living in such a way as if you had completely chosen whatever you feel or experience at this moment. Wow, that's an interesting way to do it. This inner alignment with now is the end of suffering. That's it. Take down the cathedrals, take down the religions, take down the priests. They're not needed, really. If you want to wake up and you want to have life and have it abundantly, you have to return to the consciousness of God. And it is a here and now consciousness. And it brings about harmony and healing and peace. And there is no other path but to finally come to that juncture in your experience where you start to practice the presence of God, which is the presence of love and the presence of compassion. because you have lived long enough before you get to that juncture to know that people that are not operating in that awareness yet are creating their own suffering. And they are worthy of compassion, worthy of help, worthy of blessing. Meditation is the gateway to the silence of the ego. In meditation, we practice allowing this incessant thinking, forever attempting to bring about advantage in the outer-directed, illusion-driven world. You let it relax, you let it go, and you say, what's wrong with being here? That's meditation. What's wrong with just being here, sitting here? Not being driven, not wanting, not fearing, not grasping, not judging. What's wrong with that? Just sitting here, doing nothing, but enjoying the peace. That will be our affirmation. When we get to the silence, you can use that. Use that thought. Play with that thought. What's wrong with just being here, doing nothing? As we go forth from this meditation, it may be helpful for you to learn to catch negative emotions and thoughts as they arise, and then just return your awareness to the very present moment and what is happening there, and releasing those thoughts of some injustice, not personalizing anything that takes place, but accepting the moment as it is, accepting that now awareness just as it is. And you can do this with this particular phrase: there is only God. And God's perfect will being done. There is only God. And God's perfect will being done. For this opportunity to practice the presence, let us feel gratitude for that. It's what our lives are all about. Feeling gratitude and feeling delight again, and being free again to love. And to all of this, we say amen. We will take an offering for unity now. As we're doing this, I need to inform you that there will be no, I usually have a video, about a 4 or 5 minute video for everyone to watch before they leave, to be in touch with the fact that we're all one with this life force that is nature itself. However, we're having technical difficulties and we can't show the video.
We can close with Let There Be Peace on Earth. That's what I did last week.
Okay. They're going to close with Let There Be Peace on Earth after the offering. So as we take our offerings in our hands, let's bless them with this offering statement. Divine love is my true life and my conscious destiny. Therefore, I give. Together, please. Divine love is my true life and my conscious destiny. Therefore, I give.
How gracious, beloved, your presence within me. How beautiful your song in my soul. Like sunlight and rainfall, expanding, embracing, how gracious the presence we share. How joyous, beloved, my presence